Hi there. Today is February the 6th, and we're looking at a part of Exodus chapters 23, 24, 25, or the latter part of 23, 24, and 25. And there's a lot going on in these chapters. At the end of chapter 23, we find God instructing his people to celebrate 3 feasts in the year. Now, we've already met the feast of Passover, but then after the feast of Passover, there's also the feast which is connected with first fruits, the early harvest, which the Jews know as Shavuot, we know as a Feast of Weeks, or the Feast of Pentecost. And then there's a third feast in the year when everyone comes together, and that's the Feast of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. It's a harvest feast. It's the celebration also of the fact that Israel was kept by God in the wilderness and maintained by God, and they dwelt in tents, and so at Sukkot people live in sheds or tabernacles still to this day in Israel. Then in chapter 24 there's a very key and a very important scripture. We saw back in Genesis 15 how God made covenant with Abraham by getting Abraham to divide sacrifice down the middle into 2 parts and lay the 2 parts on either side, which is the ancient sign of covenant. God then passed between the pieces in a lamp of fire, in a great beacon of fire. Now here in Exodus 24, that covenant is renewed. The covenant with the people is renewed as God is speaking with them and giving them the law, and it's renewed in this way. The people can't all divide animals in half and walk through the middle, so God has them sacrifice an animal, and they take the two halves, the two sections of the blood, and they sprinkle some on the altar that is built in the name of the Lord. Half is sprinkled on the altar to show that that is the Lord's half of the blood, and then half is sprinkled on the people. And so it's a very covenantal action that's taking place. The two are joined together in covenant. It's like they have 2 halves of a puzzle that come together and meet. And then coming out of that, we saw again back in Genesis, we saw that a meal is part of covenant making. And so here 70 elders of the people of Israel are taken up the mountain, and they actually see God, and they sit in God's presence in this amazing encounter with God, where God doesn't touch them. They're allowed to look on the face of God, and it says they eat and drink. And that's very important because a meal is part of the covenant making. So here is the people of Israel joined again to God in this amazing covenant action just before Moses goes up the mountain. God's presence comes down on the mountain, dwells there for a week, and then thereafter Moses goes up and he's in the cloud, he's in the fire for about 6 weeks. Chapter 25 of Exodus, that we're also looking at, then gives the instructions for the people to bring offerings so that they can make a shed or a tent where God can dwell, where God can be with them. And there's various furnishings, the ark or the box chest where the covenant will go, where God's record will go. There's a table, there's the menorah, there's the lampstand. And these are going to be things that will be right in the focus of Israel's encampment. So we come to amazing things here in Exodus today. And we know that through Jesus, who himself was the covenant sacrifice, and by the way, the thing that was divided in the covenant, the new covenant, was not Jesus' body itself. Jesus' body remained whole. But the thing that was divided in 2 was the veil of the temple, was the curtain separating God from us. And that was torn in 2 and torn apart, and God broke out. And so we also are included in this amazing covenant of God's people that exists even to today. So we can be glad in that on this February the 6th.